Welcome to Craft Conversations. Today we are here with Bruno Vinhas. How are you, Bruno?
I'm doing good.
Did you want to start by telling us a bit about yourself?
So I'm a curator and textile artist, pretty much involved in mixed media. I use a lot of natural materials and natural dyes. I'm very focused on embroidery. That's something that I'm passionate about. But because I recycle things a lot, I end up with a lot of synthetic fabric. A lot of my pieces, especially my older pieces, they have a lot of natural elements in them. So sticks and stones and feathers and things that I incorporate to the embroidery. And I love scavenging secondhand stores for fabrics that I really like. So that's how I kind of start putting pieces together. Embroidery is my medium. That's what I like to do. So no matter what I'm doing with what materials I'm working on, I will always have an element of embroidery in them. And then the reusing of different fabrics and different things. I'm just passionate about fabric. Fabric for me is everything. The idea of building and dyeing and constructing, deconstructing the fabric and understanding how it works. Even the synthetic fabrics, they fascinate me because they're plastic, so you can burn things in them and you can create patterns by burning or by taking away things from it. But I do love inserting things that people wouldn't think necessarily belongs in embroidery. I grew up in Brazil, so a lot of my practice comes from my belief system influence, which is the Candomblé, which is an African Brazilian religion. That's where all my colors and the movement of my pieces comes from. I moved around quite a lot. Canada is the fourth country that I've been living in. I live in Brazil. I was born in Salvador and I lived there for most of my life. Then I moved to Recife, which is another state above my state. Then I left there and I went to Ireland. I lived in Dublin for 2.5 years. I did travel a lot when I was in Dublin because I was volunteer with an organization called Dance for Life that we used to go to schools to talk about STDs and HIV, and we use dance as a medium to work on that. And I also volunteer at the ARC, which is a center for children. So it's a whole museum dedicated for children. And that's where I start falling in love with curatorial process. Ashley Downey was someone that she was the first curator that I met, and I fell in love with her way and her vision. So then I left there and I moved to New Zealand. I lived in 2 different cities in New Zealand. I lived in Auckland and Christchurch. When I moved to Christchurch was right after they had the earthquake that destroyed the whole city. So it was quite an interesting place to be in a time that I was there because the city was rebuilding. And then I moved to Canada, straight to St. John's. And I moved here to go through the textile program. And through the textile program is that I fell in love with curatorial practices, and that's how I started curating shows. I left Brazil almost 15 years ago, and I only moved to English-speaking countries. When I moved out of the country, I was living with someone that spoke Portuguese, so in the end of the day, you spend the whole day speaking English, but you go home and then you can speak Portuguese. When I moved to Canada, I didn't have that anymore. I was only speaking English the whole time. So between the beginning of 2016 and almost towards the beginning of 2017, I pretty much avoided talking to my family because I couldn't relate to the words that they were saying. Mm-hmm. I couldn't understand what they were saying. My brain shut off Portuguese for me. Was relearning the language that I spoke for 30 years of my life.
Wow.
Lost in Translation was my graduation gallery piece. It was a project that I adored making that project. It was a piece talking about that. It was a piece in 2 phases. There was a 3-tier textile piece that talks about the layers of the words, and then the final piece was this gigantic dress that I made, and it's all burned. I took inspiration from the Portuguese styles, the flowers and the details and the colors of the Portuguese styles to create peeling flowers from the dress. And on the train of the dress, which was a 10-feet train, I machine embroidery a quote from a Brazilian author that she talks about the importance of language and how that changes the people. During that process, I found out that there is a clinical condition for that. I'm not gonna remember what the name is right now, but it is on my website. It is a condition that like the human brain goes in survival mode when they feel that they are not getting anywhere, and they fast learn how to speak the language of the place they are, so they can survive while putting their mother tongue in the background. In the beginning of 2017, when I was working on that piece, I made a point to be calling my sister every night. I would call her and we would spend like about an hour on the phone just so I could listen to the words she was speaking. And it was really funny because I was doing reverse translation. Like I was translating the words from Portuguese to English so I could understand. About a couple days ago, I visited a couple friends in Halifax, and they are Brazilian. They're from the same city that I live, and they look at me and they say like, you don't know how to speak Portuguese anymore, because like I was making an effort to actually talk in Portuguese with them, and although I knew a lot of the words and I know a lot of the slangs and I could carry a conversation, some like verbs and connectors and things like they were like English connectors, and I spoke them in Portuguese as if I was speaking English, and they could see like the effort that I was making to talk about it. It gets to a point that like you don't belong anywhere.
Right.
So right now in this point of my life, I don't belong anywhere. Like I don't belong in any of the countries that I lived in, and I also don't belong in my own culture because I don't have the connection with that. Besides the things that I listen to, like the music and like my work and my belief system, there is that feeling that you are not whole because you don't belong anywhere.
When it comes to cultural displacement, what has been your experience with that?
I think that one of the hard things that people don't usually understand is that when you're not living in your home country, like the place that you were born and grew up, everything is different. And people treat you different, and people perceive you in a different way. And that's a really hard place to be. Yeah, I lived in 4 different countries, including my home country, and the first 2 countries that I lived, I wasn't able to continue a practice as much as I wanted to, because you always seen as the foreigner, and that kind of like just builds up on you. So there is like a lot of light being shed on newcomers and immigration process and things these days. Every ad you see from the government makes it seem really easy to get through that, but it's not. It's a stressful process. I remember when I finished my degree here in Canada that I had to apply for a work visa. It took them 9 months to give me a result. So I spent 4 months that I couldn't work because you don't have a visa and you are what they call like a temporary situation that like kinda have the same rights of your previous visa, but you don't actually have a visa, so like you can't leave the country. It just builds up on you. It is stressful because you never know the next day. So like you don't start building a life, you don't start building a home in this process because you never know when they're gonna kick you out. I use my art in that sense as means for, it's not only expressing the feelings that I'm having towards it, but also an advocacy for people to understand that, you know, there is humans behind immigrants. A lot of the time people don't see that. I don't know how many times I've heard that I was stealing jobs and that I didn't belong here and that I shouldn't be doing that. In that sense, like I made a piece actually that has all these slurs that I've been called in since I left my country. The title of the piece is "And They Call Me Names." It's kind of a really nice piece. At first sight, you don't actually pay attention to what is written on it. So you see that on the cow here, it has all the, like not all, but like a lot of the names that I've been called. So crazy, gay, artist, mixed race, foreigner. Those are kind of the things that people call me. This is a piece based on is a reference to the dance that we do on my belief system when you reverence one of your gods. And all the little tattoos and marks are symbols of the place.
Did you want to talk about how spirituality bridges into your art?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like a lot of my art is actually, it's the moment where I can pay my respects to my own religion. There's a piece over there behind Anna that is also a respectful piece. Those fabrics actually came from Africa. Yeah, they're from Angola. I try to use the elements that I would have used and then incorporate elements from the place where I'm living. So I have like banana leaves and parrot feathers, but I also have like a birch bark in there. So it's kind of like mixing those things, and like, you know, like, because spirituality has no borders, and no matter where you are, there are elements from that place that will bridge into your own spirituality. That red crown on the top there, that used to have like horns and was suspended in the ceiling, and there was like an air movement going around it. It was the first time that I actually played with the installation work, so I deconstructed a ceiling fan.
Oh my gosh.
And have like fabric going around, and the fabric was constantly moving, and that piece was just suspended in the center.
Do you want to talk about the choice of color there? It's this bright red.
So that is referencing another goddess from my belief system.
Okay.
And she's the goddess of fire and storms and lightning, so that's where they...
Yeah. And what kind of fur? Is that fur?
It's horsehair. So like the whole embroidery in that piece is done with horsehair. Even the
I
details,
see.
the filigrans and everything is done
The
with
loops.
horsehair. I dyed the horsehair with hair dye. It smelled awful in my house for 3 weeks because, you know, it's an animal hair and is attached to the leather, and then you wet the leather with chemicals, and that's pretty much what I do in my artwork. But finding myself in the Candomblé, which is the African Brazilian belief system that I carry with me, I felt myself seen because there's no right or wrong. There is a choice. So you either do this or do that. Both things will bring good things and bad things. It's not like you're deemed to burn in hell if you do this thing or the other thing. I bring that respect and understanding with me, not only on my personal practice as an artist, but also in my personal practice as a curator and working with community. I don't think there is need for anyone to be judging the other person. Like, I see everyone as human beings. And I don't talk about my religion a lot, because if you grew up Catholic, my religion is the worst thing in the world, because we believe in nature, we believe in that the gods were humans at some point, and that they have flaws, and according to the Catholicism, like, gods don't have flaws. And so that belief system, like, it's, you know, each god reigns over a nature aspect, and there is a respect to the nature. So like, I don't go inside the ocean without asking permission. I don't walk a trail without asking permission to walk the trail.
There's like an aspect of consent there.
Yeah, so like I say that I'm doing this, and in return I ask for nothing to happen to me, you know, and to protect the people that is around me doing the same thing with me. So there is always like this respect for the natural elements.
Right.
Although I still practice my belief system within me and within the things that I do, it is not something that I can practice everywhere, because there's no place to practice. There's no one that believes in that in the places that I live that actually understand. For disclosure, like, I grew up Catholic. Like, I used to go to the church like Saturdays and Sunday because my grandparents told me to. I had to learn how to read the Bible in Latin because my grandfather used to be was trained to be a priest.
Oh wow! Oh my goodness.
So he made us read the Bible in Latin. So I studied Latin for a good 6 years, and then I started questioning it, because there's a lot of things that they say that will, you know, it's a punishment situation. So I went through a lot of like different belief systems to understand what was missing. In the end of the day, most of them are literally the same. They just change names and where they come from. And I respect all of them equally.
So I also was wondering, is there an activism in your work?
I think it's the only medium that I can be true to myself is through my art. And being true to myself means questioning things that are happening in the world.
You also have embroidery on the I Can't Breathe mask.
Yeah, so the beating of the mask, it's to symbolize the blood of a cut throat.
I know you partnered with a photographer on this piece, is that correct?
Jared Reed, he did a show and he gave masks to everyone, and everyone could create whatever.
Oh, that's interesting.
So at the time I was working on my solo show when it stopped, and when he gave me that piece, like I was literally just working, you know, with human anatomy, like hearts and brains and things, and that's where that piece came from.
That's something else I wanted to ask as well. There's so many hearts that I see in your work. So what is there a meaning behind that?
The heart is the only thing in your body that you don't control, right? You control your breathing, like you can stop breathing when you want to. You can, you know, if you are somebody that does meditation, like you can clear your mind and not thinking about anything. You can stop moving your legs and feet, and you know, you can stop blinking if you want to, but you can't stop your heart if you want to. And I think that that's what, like, that's the pulse that takes me further, is that like it's there, you know, and I always remind myself of that. The hearts came to me when I was in a depressed phase, and like the beating was the reminder that like there's still something worth fighting for. A lot of the pieces that I have still in the house is pieces that my husband, he liked it, and I kept it. That hand there is actually his hand I use as a model for, and I kept it.
How did you get the veins to look, it's almost like they're beneath the skin? Is it embroidered?
Everything is embroidered. Yeah.
The hair is so realistic.
So there's a lot of hair going on here, which is really weird because it does feel like hair, but it is a very thin fishing line. And then you have like the nails. So the veins are embroidered on the under fabric, and I have a layer of like a see-through fabric on the top to act like skin.
How did you get the nails to look realistic like that?
It was fabric and lots and lots and lots of glue. So I can create like the varnish side, and then clear nail polish.
One of those questions that I had a while ago before we started talking about, you know, like you getting rid of your art, basically, is just the extent that, you know, like when you put an art into place, people have to look at it, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. And I was just curious, like, getting your thoughts on like kind of art as place building. Do you create place, and do you create through art that way?
Art builds bridges and communities, and it also burns them. It's a great place for you to be yourself, and either people accept that or not.
Yeah.
So building community is something that no matter what art language you are in, like no matter what medium you work with, like you are creating community, even if it's a community of just people that appreciate it, or if it's a community of people that work with you. So in this sense, like art is creating place.
Yeah.
But for me, art creates moments. And that's why getting rid of my art is important to me.
Yeah.
Because when I made that, it was a moment in time where that was important in my life. And I had to deal with that emotion or feeling or, you know, advocacy or, you know, expression or whatever. Like, it was on that particular moment that I had to create that, and I need to express that so vividly that I could not get myself out of my mind if I couldn't finish that piece and put that in the word. So I create that moment, and then that moment becomes trapped in time in your artwork. And it's not something that I want to be reviving all the time.
Yeah.
So I want that to move on. Yeah, for me, art is very ephemeral, and by all means, like, 10 years from now, when people don't know who I am anymore, my pieces will still be out there, and people are going to be looking at them. Well, I hope that they're going to be out there. And people are going to be looking at them and interpreting them in a completely different way. Just like, look what we do with all like the classical fine arts people, you know, like we reinterpret their pieces all the time, and like, what did Shakespeare wanted to say with that? Like, well, he said what he said, that's it, you know, he put on paper.
One other topic you mentioned as well was transformation. So the process of creating and planning your art, the act of creating it, or the final piece. Do you think that all of those are transformative to you? One of those?
The creation process is very transformative for me. Like, it changed the way that I see the material, it changed how I see myself working with the material, it changed the way that I see myself, period. I kind of like the material to dictate what I do and not what I do with the material. Fabric manipulation is one of those things that, like, you're gonna hear a lot of people saying, oh, you can't do that with this type of fabric, but have you ever let the fabric do that for you? So I started manipulating fabric and leather when I was in college here still. The the range of opportunities is like gigantic, and you end up with things that you didn't even know was possible. And I think that that's a little bit of like the transformation too, like it's getting something that was once one thing and making into something else. And that's what we do as people. Like we were something 5 years ago and we are not today. So, and that's why I have this passion for fabric, because fabric is something now, and if you start cutting or folding or stitching, it becomes something else. With us as humans, like we start in one point and we learn and we experience, and no matter what path of life you are, no matter where you live, you are always learning. Learning is not a formal thing that needs to happen in a school, in a classroom. You learn in a conversation, you learn in a circle, you learn in a gathering, you learn by being immersed in different cultures, you learn by listening instead of talking. And that transforms you. And that's what fabric does for me. Fabrics allow me that transformation.